Men are far more often forgiven for sexual infidelity than women are. After all, boys will be boys. It's okay for Reverend Dimsdale to have a child with Hester Prynne, but it's not okay for Hester. It's fine for Tom Buchanan to cheat on Daisy, but not for Daisy to cheat on him. And there's nothing wrong with the boys in Easy A sleeping around. But what about Olive Pendergast? Shameful. Come on, is this really how things should be? Welcome back, and thank you for wanting to know the facts and the truth. What's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is big. You can't miss it on the news. You can't miss it on college campuses, and you really can't miss it online. But what are the facts? Why is this happening? That's what we're here to answer. Our approach is to examine the major themes and focus on the important events that help you make sense of what's happening today. We care about knowing the truth. We also care about the basic human right to live in peace. We care about ending the suffering. We care about finding justice. And we think you're here because you do too. The only path for us then is to go after the facts and be open to what they show us. Life can be beautiful without hatred, violence, and war, and maybe the way there starts with better understanding each other. Better understanding the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, the history of their conflicts and past peace efforts, and some of the major issues standing in the way of forging real peace. What the Hell is Going On in Gaza is a 9-part series made up of 30 episodes, each designed to help you understand a different but important part of the picture. As part 5 of our series continues, we'll keep giving you the facts you need to answer the question, who does the world blame? It's important because it has a real effect on what you hear. Here in episode 22, we'll focus on whether there's a double standard when it comes to judging Israel. Spoiler alert, there definitely is. Okay, what are we talking about here? A double standard would mean when another country does something, it's fine, nobody cares. But when Israel does the same thing, or even something much less, it's condemned. Is that the case? It sure is. The world's focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is out of all proportion to what's going on there. Even if we assume that Israel is completely in the wrong and unjustified in its actions in Gaza, why does this place get so much attention when there's so many other places in the world where people are suffering terribly as a result of war, famine, and oppression? Even if we accept the casualty numbers claimed by Hamas, which we shouldn't, they amount to some 35,000 deaths, including both combatants and civilians. These are deaths from a war that Hamas started, that Hamas promises to continue, that Hamas purposely fights in a manner designed to maximize civilian casualties. Nonetheless, let's consider some other casualty events involving the killing of Muslims. Some 500,000 Muslims have been killed in the war in Syria. Barron's reported that according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, quote, Syria's war has killed more than 507,000 people and, quote, more than 164,000 civilians, including more than 15,000 women and 25,000 children have been killed. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in Yemen. BBC reported that, quote, the UN estimated that by the start of 2022, the conflict in Yemen had caused over 377,000 deaths, with 60% the result of hunger, lack of health care, and unsafe water. It says more than 11,000 children are known to have been killed or wounded as a direct result of the fighting. And Muslims in Sudan continue to suffer from repeated conflicts there. According to Bloomberg, between April 2023 and May 2024, quote, as many as 150,000 people may have been killed, and the violence shows no sign of abating. Millions have fled their homes. Approximately 240,000 Muslims have been killed in Afghanistan and Pakistan between 2001 and 2021, according to BuzzFeed News. And even more Muslims have been killed in Iraq. According to the Watson Institute at Brown University, quote, between 280,771 and 315,190 have died from direct war-related violence caused by the U.S., its allies, the Iraqi military and police, and opposition forces from the time of the invasion through March 2023. In China, between 800,000 and 2 million Uyghur Muslims have been held in concentration camps where many have been tortured, sterilized, and even murdered. According to the United States Holocaust Museum, quote, "The Chinese government's campaign against Uyghurs is multifaceted and systematic. Core strategies of the campaign include identity-based persecution, mass detention, surveillance, enforced sterilizations, forced labor, and forced assimilation." And, quote, "China has created a large system of arbitrary detention and enforced disappearance. Approximately 1 million Uyghurs are currently imprisoned in detention camps." But these terrible events don't spark world outrage and condemnation. The world doesn't seem to care that much about these places and the horrible things that have happened and are still happening there. No ceasefire movements, no weekly rallies in major Western cities, no university campus takeovers. As this post notes, God forbid Israel defend its Jewish and Arab citizens from being massacred by terrorists. According to Fondapol, a French think tank, between 1979 and 2019, more than 33,000 Islamist terrorist attacks took place worldwide, causing the deaths of more than 165,000 people. And certainly things haven't settled down since 2019. There is no worldwide public outcry against Muslims. We see no posters calling to keep the world clean of Muslims. But when Israel defends itself against Islamist terrorism, all Jews everywhere in the world are demonized and attacked. It is horrific what goes on in the world that no one seems to care about. But imagine if Israel put 19 Yazidi girls in a cage and burned them alive, as ISIS did. Or imagine if Israel lined up enemy fighters and executed them on video, as ISIS did. Well, that's not what Israel does. Israel defends itself against enemies who do. Enemies who share the same ideology and who commit the same brutal medieval atrocities as ISIS. And the world hates Israel for that. But why is that? Because Israel is a Jewish state. The double standard also applies to more than just Muslim deaths. How about some of America's actions? 2,403 Americans, including 68 civilians, were killed at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. response? We killed over 3 million Japanese, including over 1 million civilians. Accusations of genocide? 0. Worldwide condemnation? No. The German people elected a militant government that invaded neighboring countries. The U.S. joined the war against Germany to stop them, which killed some 8.8 million Germans, including 3 million civilians. Accusations of genocide? 0. Worldwide condemnation? No. On 9/11, terrorists killed 2,977 on American soil. The U.S. response was a war on terror that killed nearly 1 million people and indirectly caused the deaths of another 3 to 4 million people. Accusations of genocide? 0. Worldwide condemnation? No. The double standards we just described are anti-Semitism, but that's not the whole story. Among Palestinians, there are 2 factors behind the intense hatred of Jews. Yes, anti-Semitism is one, the other is shame. Let's start with anti-Semitism. Looking more broadly than just at Palestinians or the Arab world, anti-Semitism is something that has existed for thousands of years. The Kingdom of Israel battled the Persian, Egyptian, Greek, and Roman empires. Competition with these empires, as well as the unwavering commitment of Jews to preserving their traditions and religion, particularly in the face of other later emerging religions, Christianity and Islam, made fertile soil for hatred to grow. Anti-Semitism is made of lies, absurd stereotypes, and contradictory accusations. Nonetheless, it has persisted. Historian and author Paul Johnson wrote, quote, What strikes the historian surveying anti-Semitism worldwide over more than 2 millennia is its fundamental irrationality. It seems to make no sense any more than malaria or meningitis make sense. Even so, anti-Semitism remains prevalent around the world, and this necessarily influences how the world views Israel and, by extension, the plight of the Palestinian people. A February 2024 poll by the Anti-Defamation League found that 1 in 4 Americans held anti-Semitic views. The same poll also found that 17% of Gen Z and 12% of millennials in America thought the right solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the elimination of the State of Israel. The New York Times, reporting on the ADL's poll from 2014, reported that the percentage of people holding anti-Semitic beliefs was 93% in the West Bank and Gaza, 88% in Yemen, and 87% in Algeria. Worldwide, the figure was a remarkable 26%. The second factor behind the intense hatred of Jews in the region is shame. This might sound a little dramatic, but let's go through some of the history and what Israel meant to the Arabs living in Palestine. Starting in the 19th century, the Jewish population of Palestine began to grow significantly, first with immigrants from the Russian Empire, and later with refugees from the Arab nations that expelled them. With these numbers, the status quo of Arabs being the ruling class and Jews being oppressed as dhimmi began to change. But Jews, especially the penniless refugees, were seen as the weakest of peoples. Their rise represented an intolerable embarrassment, a dishonor, and a weakness to the Arabs. They believed Islam would overtake the world. Instead, it was failing against the very weakest imaginable opponent. 1 year after the first Zionist conference, as the number of Jews emigrating to Palestine began to accelerate, Rashid Rida, a prominent and highly respected Arab leader in the Ottoman Empire, wrote the following to the Arabs of Palestine. Quote, "You complacent non-entities, are you content for it to be reported in the newspapers of every country that the penniless of the weakest peoples, the Jews, whom all governments are expelling, have so much knowledge and understanding of civilization and its ways that they can take possession of your country, establish colonies in it, and reduce its masters to hired laborers and its rich to poor men?" What's the point? The point is that any loss to the lowly Jews was felt as a symbol of Islamic weakness, retreat, and failure. In the late 19th century, many Muslims felt at the time that Islam was and should be ascendant. The Ottoman Empire had reigned since the 14th century, securing Muslim domination of the region for many hundreds of years. The weakening of that empire coincided with the increased presence and power of the local Jewish population, which was bolstered by diaspora Jews returning to their ancestral homeland. As both factors accelerated, the growing Jewish population and ultimately the failure and disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, for Arabs of the region, it basically rocked their world. Remember, too, that the Jews appeared to the Arabs to be the colonial forward brigade of first the Russian Empire, then the British Empire, both hated enemies. The Arabs were wrong in this assessment, but it only mattered what they thought at the time. The end effect was that the Arabs felt Islam itself was losing when it should have been winning. And it was there in their own region that it was losing, and worst of all, it was losing to the weakest people on earth, the destitute refugee Jews. Utterly unbearable. This is why the Islamic world doesn't seem to care about mass death and starvation of Muslims in so many other places around the world, but are inflamed to the point of apoplexy by Israel and its Jews. They feel disgraced by Israel's existence and by their own failure in every conflict with Israel. What happens to the Muslim Uyghurs in China is about China, but what happens with Israel and the Jews is about the strength or weakness of Islam. The mistakes the Palestinians and surrounding Arab nations have made, the losses they've suffered, their inability to push Israel into the sea, only fuel their desire to overcome those failures. All of this makes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict very different from any other conflict. Until the Arab world can accept responsibility for its own failures and recognize that the existence of Israel is not an intolerable insult to Islam, the bloodshed will continue. The consequence of anti-Semitism and of the intensity of it in the Muslim world, which severely colors the information coming out of the region, is that we see Israel held to absurd standards. We see a double standard applied to everything Israel does. What follows are just a few examples. An obvious one to start with is that the elected government of the Palestinians in Gaza started a war against Israel. The world quickly sent Palestinians aid by air, land, and sea, and the United States built a port especially for them. Syrians, Yemenis, Iraqis, Uyghurs, Sudanese, and others are suffering kidnapping, torture, murder, and more. Disease and starvation are rampant. Where is their aid? Where are their ports? When hundreds of girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram in Nigeria, Michelle Obama led the campaign to free them, calling them our girls. She spoke out quickly and forcefully. Quote, "Like millions of people across the globe, my husband and I are outraged and heartbroken over the kidnapping of more than 200 Nigerian girls from their school dormitory in the middle of the night. This unconscionable act was committed by a terrorist group determined to keep these girls from getting an education. Grown men attempting to snuff out the aspirations of young girls. But when Jewish girls were raped, murdered, and taken hostage on October 7th, she did not offer words of support or call for their release. In fact, there was silence from much of the world, except for those statements that implied equivalence between Israel and Hamas or focused on Israel as the wrongdoer. The Times of Israel reported, quote, "Among others, the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, known as UN Women, released a statement on October 13th equating the Hamas brutalities with Israel's self-defense. Likewise, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women neglected to explicitly condemn Hamas's atrocities, and the international Me Too movement completely failed to mention Hamas or the Israeli victims. When Israel's military accidentally killed 7 aid workers from World Central Kitchen, world outrage exploded, and the predominant storyline was that it was a monstrous and intentional act. But when a 2015 Saudi airstrike mistakenly targeted a wedding in Yemen, killing 131 civilians, you probably didn't even hear about it. When a U.S. airstrike in Afghanistan in 2015 mistakenly targeted a hospital in Kunduz, killing 42 civilians, you probably didn't even hear about it. And when a U.S. airstrike in Afghanistan in 2008 accidentally killed 90 civilians in Azizabad, you probably didn't even hear about it. When Egyptian forces in 2015 mistakenly killed 12 civilians in the Wahad area, including Mexican tourists, you probably didn't even hear about it. When a NATO airstrike in Afghanistan in 2007 accidentally killed 108 civilians in Balabaluk, again, you probably didn't even hear about it. Again and again. When the Saudis kill 131, it's an accident you don't even hear about. When the U.S. kills 90, it's an accident you don't even hear about. When Egypt kills 12, it's an accident you don't even hear about. When NATO kills 108, it's an accident you don't even hear about. But when Israel accidentally kills 7, the world's outrage is deafening, and Israel is a heartless, soulless, bloodthirsty murderer. And of course, those are just a few examples. Finally, let's look at the other side of the coin, the Palestinian cause. There are for sure other groups who plead for the right to self-determination in their own land, and there have been for a very long time. Where's the public outcry? The media obsession? The UN and international government demand for a nation for the Kurds, the Yazidi, the Rohingya, the Tibetans? What about the Tamils, or the Quechua, or the Aymara, or the Hazaras? Given what we've discussed in this episode, it seems the issue is that Jews are involved. Is there a double standard? It's undeniable. When Jews are involved, the world erupts in anger and condemnation. When they're not, the world hardly notices. Thank you for watching episode 22 of our series, What the Hell is Going On in Gaza? We hope you got a better understanding of how Israel faces extraordinary criticism, unlike any other country in the world, even when its actions deserve less criticism than other countries. If you'd like to leave a comment or get in touch, visit our website at www.getthefactsmiddleeast.com. We hope you'll keep going and watch episode 23, Does Israel Fight Fair?, where we'll look at Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest in learning more about the war in Gaza. And remember, where there is no knowledge, there can be no insight.